Welcome back, friends. I'm going to do a little bit something different today. I've actually created this entire tutorial that the script, everything was written by AI. It was written by the ChatGTP bot, and I've been experimenting with AI like many of you probably have in the last little while who hasn't sort of thing. But I wanted to kind of see how much ChatGTP can teach us about CSS and CSS properties and how accurate it is and how well it can be as an instructor. As many of you know, I've spent many hours educating people here on YouTube and with millions of views. And I thought, let's see how good the AI can teach. So I've actually just have a few simple prompts that I've used. And I'm going to read the script that ChatGPT gave me back word for word. And then I'll show you the code that it generated. So the entire script, 100%, I haven't edited a single word. And I want to see how well ChatGPT did at teaching us this CSS Flexbox introduction tutorial. So without further ado, follow along. Let's get started. Now, as a preamble, if you see me looking over here to the left, that's because I'm reading exactly what the AI fed me back. So I'm going to read it word for word without deviation. So let's get started. Welcome to this tutorial on CSS Flexbox. Flexbox is a powerful layout tool in CSS that allows you to easily create flexible and responsive layouts. It is particularly useful in designing complex user interfaces and controlling the position and sizing of elements on a web page. In this tutorial, we will cover the basics of how to use Flexbox and show you some examples of how it can be used. First, let's talk about the basics of Flexbox. Flexbox works by defining a flexible container that holds a set of flex items. The container is defined using the displayFlex property, while the items inside the container are defined using FlexGrow, FlexShrink, and FlexBasis properties. The FlexGrow determines how much a flex item should grow or shrink to fill the available space. The FlexShrink property controls how much the item should shrink if there isn't enough space to display all of the items, and the FlexBasis property sets the initial size of the item. To demonstrate these concepts, let's create a simple example. We will create a container with 3 items inside of it and use Flexbox to control their positioning and size. So this sample code was generated and spit out from the AI. All right, let's continue with the script. Let's walk through this code step by step first. First, we define the container using displayFlex. That's this property here. We also set the FlexWrap property to wrap, which tells the items to wrap to a new line if there isn't enough space to hold all of them on a single line. We set the justifyContent property to center, which centers the items horizontally within the container. We also set the align_items property to center, which centers the items vertically within the container. Finally, we set the height and background properties to give the container a specific size and color. Next, we define these items inside the container with the item of class. So you can see right there. We set the flex property to, right here, 1, 0, auto, which means the item can grow to fill the available space, but cannot shrink. We also set the height and margin properties to give the items a specific size and spacing, and the background color property to give them a specific color. If we save and open this HTML file in a browser, we should see the container with the 3 items inside, all centered horizontally and vertically. If we resize the window, the item should wrap to a new line if there isn't enough space to display all on a single line. Let's go ahead and test that. So as I resize this window, these items right here are going to wrap if there's not enough space. And there we go. It's Command-Control-R in Safari and Firefox. It's in the Inspect menu. Okay, so now we can kind of resize this. So here's what you're seeing, right? So as soon as the items don't have enough space, they automatically wrap down to a new line. So that's what the chat explained to us in that flex property. Okay, so we can see that in action now. And then it said, I hope you found this tutorial helpful. And that's the end of the tutorial. I wasn't quite satisfied with the response, so I asked the question. So the next prompt, I'll put this on screen. So I asked, is the flex property shorthand for flex grow, flex shrink, and flex basis? Okay, that was my next prompt. And this is the next response that it gave me. Yes, that's correct. The flex property is a shorthand property that combines 3 separate properties: flex grow, flex shrink, and flex basis. The values for these properties are written in a specific order, separated by spaces. And then it actually output me right here this screenshot. And so you can see it output the code and showed me the property name and then how each of those 3 properties were used in their specific order they're supposed to be used in. And you can see here from the example, when it declared flex, those are those 3 properties. It did mention all 3 of those properties in the intro tutorial, right? In the very beginning, it talked about how there was the flex, grow, flex, shrink, but it didn't explain to me that I could use them as shorthand. So I prompted it and it told me all about that. The flex grow property sets the flex item's ability to grow if there's not enough available space. The flex shrink property sets the flex item's ability to shrink if there's not enough space. The flex basis property sets the initial size of the flex item before any remaining space is distributed. Okay? And that's set to auto here in this case. By using the shorthand flex property, you can specify all 3 of those properties in a single line of code. And then it shows me this same exact example here. It output another screenshot. I think it was this one right here. So it showed me this code illustrating how the flex property is used in the shorthand syntax. Okay. Then I gave it one more prompt. I said, so what is the flex wrap property doing on the container class and how is that used? Because you'll notice that it talked about flex wrap earlier, but it really didn't tell me too much about that. So I gave it that prompt, and then this is what it said. The flex wrap property is used to control whether the flex items should wrap to a new line if there's not enough space on the current line. It can take 3 different values. So here's what's telling me exactly how this can work. No wrap, the flex items will all try to fit on one line, even if it means that they overflow the container. So let's go ahead and try that. Let's set the flex to no dash wrap. Or sorry, there's no wrap, there's no dash there. So no wrap. So we'll set that and refresh, and you can see, look at that. Those guys are not wrapping to a new line, even though when I shrink down, they're overflowing their container. Okay, so it told me about that property. The next one is called wrap. So let's set this back to wrap. This is the second option. The flex items will wrap onto multiple lines if necessary to prevent them from overflowing the container. So now when we go back and we see this, sure enough, it wrapped down to a new line. And then the third option it gives me is what is known as wrap reverse. So I'm going to say wrap dash reverse. And in this option, it says the flex items will wrap onto multiple lines, but in reverse order. So we can see here when we set that and we go over here, notice how the item 3 is now at the top of the list instead of the bottom of the list. So it wraps, but it wraps in reverse order. And it also output that in some code. I can't remember which one it's in. Looks like none of these screenshots. I might not have screenshotted it. But it gave me those little 3 samples in some code as well. All right, continuing. In the sample code I provided earlier, flex wrap is set to wrap, which means that the flex items will wrap onto multiple lines if necessary. This allows the items to stack vertically if there's not enough horizontal space to display them all in a single line. Here is an example of demonstrating how flex wrap works. And then it gave me this screenshot right here. So it gave me this code to show me how that flex wrapping would work. It says, in this example, the container element is set to display flex and flex wrap, which means that the items will wrap onto multiple lines if necessary. Each .item class element has a flex value of 1,0,200 pixels. And you can see that here from the screenshot. If there's not enough horizontal space, the items will all be displayed on a single line. However, if there is not enough space for the items However, if there is not enough space, the items will wrap onto multiple lines. Here's an example of how that might look. And then this is kind of cool because it actually showed me this screenshot. So it gave me an example like in code of how those items might wrap down to a new line, illustrating how that flex wrap property would work. It says, in this example, there are 7 item elements. If there's not enough horizontal space, they will all be displayed on a single line, if there is enough horizontal space. However, if there's not enough space, the items will wrap onto 2 lines, with the last item on the second line. This allows the items to stack vertically if necessary, while still maintaining their horizontal alignment. Okay. And then I gave it, I think this is the last prompt I gave it. No, I gave it 2 more prompts. I said, explain to me the concept of main axis and cross axis in Flexbox. Now, so far, the AI hasn't told me anything about these, so I'm aware of these concepts, so I kind of had to prompt it a little bit here to explain this core concept of Flexbox, but it gave me a really good answer once I prompted it. And so let's go ahead and take a look at that. I'm going to back this up, so let's back in here. So I asked it about the cross axis and main axis, and it states, let me jump back here. Flexbox is designed to work with one-dimensional layouts where elements are arranged either horizontally or vertically. To help with this, Flexbox introduces the concept of a main axis and a cross axis. The main axis is the primary axis along with which Flexbox elements are arranged. It can be horizontal or vertical, depending on the flex direction property. By default, flex direction property is set to row, which means that the main axis is horizontal. So in our little sample case here, it's the horizontal axis this way. And it's not set here in the code because that is the default. However, you can set it to column instead to make the main axis vertical. So let's go ahead and test that out. So I'm going to come in here to my wrapper here, and let's set the flex direction to, let's see, we want to set this to column. Okay, so we'll set it to column and we'll save. And you can see, sure enough, now we have our axis, which runs this way. So the axis where everything is aligned is now vertical instead of horizontal. And all the other properties still work the exact same way. So that's pretty cool. Let's continue. The cross axis is the secondary axis that is perpendicular to the main axis. It runs perpendicular to the main axis and its direction is determined by the flex direction property. If flex direction is set to row, then the cross axis runs vertically. If flex direction is set to column, then the cross axis runs horizontally. Okay, so that's basically telling us here that right, if we have our main axis set this way, then the cross axis will always be the opposite. And if we have the main axis set this way, then this will be the cross axis. So they're just sort of opposite one another. The justify content property is used to control the alignment of items along the main axis, while the align items property is used to control the items along the cross axis. And that's kind of a really big key concept of Flexbox. That's not part of the script. I just wanted to throw that in here. So when you're talking about the main, let's actually take this back. So we'll hop off here and let's delete the flex wrap. So we're going to leave that back to, whoops, not the flex wrap, which one? The flex direction. We'll set it back to row. So row is default, right? So here we have our main axis. So when you're dealing with the main axis, the align items property controls alignment within that. And when you're dealing with the cross axis, it is the justify content property. And that's how you control, right, aligning things this way or this way. And that's why Flexbox is so powerful for easily centering things. You can see we're using both of those properties here. Justify content and align items. They each correspond to one of those two axes. The reason why I think Flexbox is a little bit confusing for people starting out is because those axes can swap, right? You can swap those up and down or left and right just by switching this property of flex direction. And then everything sort of gets inverted in your head. So I think that's a little bit key to understanding the difference in these properties. All right, continuing on here. Almost done. And then it produced this set of code right here and told me the following. In this example, the container element is set to display flex, which makes a Flexbox container. The flex direction property is set to row. So here we have flex direction as row right there, which means that the main axis is horizontal. The justify content property is set to center, which centers the items along the main axis. So that's that one right there. The align items property is set to center right there, and that's going to center items along the cross axis, or this way. Each item class, so each .item element has a width and height of 100 pixels and a red background color. They also have a margin of 10 pixels to create some spacing between them. When you view this example in a web browser, you will see that the items are arranged in a horizontal row with equal spacing between them. The main axis runs horizontally from left to right. The cross axis runs vertically from top to bottom. The justify content and align items property are used to center the items both horizontally and vertically within the container. So you can see it's fairly repetitive. And then I give it one final prompt, and this is the end of the tutorial that the AI has created for us today. I said, are there any other gotchas I should be aware of with Flexbox? And the answer back was 4 gotchas that were interesting. So I'm just going to read through these. It says, number 1, yes, there are a few gotchas with Flexbox you should be aware of. Number 1, box sizing. By default, the box sizing property is set to content box, which means that the width and height properties only apply to the content of an element and do not include padding and borders. However, in Flexbox layout, it's often useful to include padding and borders in the width and height calculations. To do this, you should set the box sizing property to border box. So that's actually a good one. That's a good gotcha. That's a good suggestion. Number 2, flex basis. The flex basis property sets the initial size of a flex item and is used when calculating how much space each item should take up along the main axis. However, if the flex basis property is not set, then the browser will use the default size of the element, which can be unpredictable. To avoid this, always set the flex basis property explicitly. So, and we did that back in our code. Whoops, I've got that on. But anyway, so that's a good gotcha. Number 3, overflow. In some cases, Flexbox layouts can cause elements to overflow their containers. For example, if you have a flex item with a fixed width that is larger than the container, it will overflow. To avoid this, use the flex shrink property to allow the item to shrink if there's not enough space. So that's another good one. Number 4, nesting. Flexbox is designed to work in one-dimensional layouts. So generally, it's not recommended to nest Flexbox containers. However, if you do need to nest containers, be aware that the inner container will have its own main and cross axis, which may not be aligned with the outer container. You may need to use the flex direction property to control the alignment of the inner container. All right, and last, number 5, our 5th tip here is alignment. Finally, alignment in Flexbox can sometimes be tricky, especially when dealing with nested elements or different sized items. It's important to experiment with different alignment properties, such as justify content, align items, and align self to achieve the desired layout. Additionally, it's important to understand the differences between these properties and when to use them. All right, folks, that was the full tutorial that AI created for us on the CSS Flexbox introduction property. Now, I did want to quickly show you, this is the actual prompts I did. So I'm in chat.openai.com, and there's my first prompt. I said, give me the Flexbox tutorial. And this is the script. I read this word for word for you guys. So it generated all this. There's the code it generated. There's the next section. So there's my second prompt. There's the next bit of code it generated. There's my third prompt, the next bit of code, and then my last little bit here at the end with the gotchas. So there's the full entire output. It even formats the code for you nice and pretty. So pretty cool. I think it did a really good job. It gave us code, it gave us explanations. And the one thing I really like about ChatGPT is you can ask it back questions. So you can see once it produced some results, if I wasn't quite sure what a property means, if it gave you this result, you can say, hey, tell me what the justify content property does. And it will explain it to you in detail. And you can say, hey, how does this work? Hey, what about this? Can you tell me more about this? And it just keeps giving you further and further examples to help you try to understand some of those properties and components. Do realize that it's a chatbot, right? It's an AI, so it doesn't know if any of the code or information that it's giving you is factual or correct or anything like that. So you always have to kind of treat all AI with a bit of a grain of salt because you're not 100% sure if it's correct. But I'm quite fascinated with the AIs and how they're very, very capable tutors, personal tutors for individuals to be able to just get that little extra help or clarify things that may be confusing to them, especially, if you're in a situation where you don't have direct access to somebody who may be an expert in that field. A lot of times that AI can just get you over the hump in a bit of your learning journey. So comment down below. What do you think of the chatbot? What do you think of this tutorial? What do you think of AI generated content? What's your thoughts on that? A plus, C minus, how do you think the AI did? Are there gaps you think, big gaps that it missed? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. And I actually did a full like hour tutorial rant on artificial intelligence, talking about stable diffusion and all the image creations and all the text-based creations, all the video ones, the audio ones, the voice cloning. I didn't ever upload that tutorial or that kind of those thoughts, but I'll maybe upload that in the future. But it's definitely an interesting time, exciting. I think it's exciting to be able to watch some of these technologies progress. But we'll see you guys in the next one. Whether it's me or the AI, one way we'll keep making tutorials. All right, we'll see you later.